Walking with Beasts first aired 22 years ago. The sequel show to the award-winning Walking with Dinosaurs, which told the story of Mesozoic life, from the Triassic through to the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous. Walking with Beasts took this a step further, quite literally, to showcase life in the Cenozoic era, after the mass extinction of the dinosaurs, and the rise of mammals leading up to the modern day. After the unrivaled success of Walking with Dinosaurs in 1999, and of The Ballad of Big Al in 2000, Tim Haynes, the producers of those shows, decided that a sequel telling the story of life after the dinosaurs was the obvious route to go next, and so, Walking with Beasts was born. Whereas most people might have already been familiar with many of the species in Walking with Dinosaurs, Walking with Beasts featured primarily new subjects which had never been seen on screen before, and so had bigger shoes to fill. But with the last 50 or so million years to play with, this gave the creators plenty of room to do this. The time periods too are equally as unknown to a general audience as the creatures that inhabit them, so the show gives us a view of all the epochs within them, with the exception of the Miocene. Of course the more iconic extinct mammals are present as well, such as the woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, and the quintessential saber-toothed cat Smilodon. All of these are joined by a myriad of other strange creatures that once existed before modern humans evolved. All of these species are brought to life either via CGI from the company Framestore, who did all the previous work on dinosaurs, or by practical effects by the company Crawley Creatures, who also worked on dinosaurs, and created yet more puppets and animatronics for many of them, one of which I'm in possession of. In this video, I'll go through each episode chronologically, to discuss everything within it, as well as talk more about the species that appear. So without further ado, let's give a retrospective on Walking with Beasts. The 6 half-hour episodes, like dinosaurs before it, each focus on a single individual subject animal or group, which helps the audience to follow the story and gives us a glimpse into the world they live in. This format is perfect, and really feels like a typical nature documentary, full of stakes, consequences, and rewards. Before the beginning of the plot of the first episode, however, we are treated to an introductory sequence, bringing the audience in by explaining the premise and starting where Walking with Dinosaurs left off. It starts by showing reused footage of the mother Tyrannosaurus battling with the Ankylosaurus from Death of a Dynasty, with ominous narration stating that the dinosaurs are not long for this earth, as we see the Didelphodons scurry for safety.
But the mammal's time would come.
Kenneth Branagh returns triumphantly to narrate this series expertly, without turning it into a performance like so many other celebrity narrators who did in later paleodocs. Naming no names, Dinosaur Planet. His voice is so clear and doesn't get in the way of any of the drama, but instead heightens it at certain points. This narration also refers back to moments throughout Walking with Dinosaurs which mention the rise of mammals, and how they have an equally important part to play in the history of life. There are also a couple of new clips of mammal species which lived at the end of the Cretaceous. A GYPSONICTOPS, which uses the Leptictidium model and is seen hiding in the shadows away from the dinosaur conflict, as well as a live-acted squirrel watching from a tree, which is meant to represent a MENISCOESSUS. Both of these species aren't named here, seeing how they're no more than just cameos, but they are great to see, and are added seamlessly into the scenes. GYPSONICTOPS was an ancient early mammal which was related to Leptictidium, and shared the same order as it, Leptictida, which lived during the Mesozoic, specifically the late Cretaceous, and possibly surviving into the Paleocene. As mentioned earlier, its CGI model is identical to that of the Leptictidium seen later, which is a good attempt at the species' appearance, and makes sense for the show, seeing how it would cost more to sculpt and animate a whole new model, just for a single scene, and since both GYPSONICTOPS and Leptictidium are related to one another, this is an ideal option. Whether it's the lighting or not, it's hard to tell, but it appears to share the same exact fur patterning as the Leptictidium as well, again likely for budgetary reasons. Maybe it's a little darker, but otherwise it's the same. In terms of accuracy, it should have shorter hind limbs and resemble something more like a modern Solenodon or moonrat, but otherwise the large protruding ears, long tail and nose hold up. Also it's portrayed accurately living in the Hell Creek Formation alongside the likes of Tyrannosaurus. MENISCOESSUS is only shown in one shot like the GYPSONICTOPS, and only its face, so it's hard to judge how accurate it is purely on this, but seeing how it's live acted by a squirrel of some species, I'm not exactly sure which. And multituberculids, which MENISCOESSUS was a member of, resembled modern rodents, I'd say it does its job. Unfortunately, because of this partially blocked view, there's not much else to say about this animal, but in life it would have looked a lot like a squirrel, but likely lacked a bushy tail or hair on its tail entirely. As we see a shot of late Cretaceous Earth from space, we hear the line,
"The last dinosaurs were already living on a sick planet."
Which is untrue, as the late Cretaceous was a vibrant and thriving world, full of diverse ecosystems, with no doom-laden threats apparent. The region of North America where Death of Dynasty is set was also more like the Everglades in terms of habitat, rather than sparsely vegetated lava fields. Yet this is what the episode showed, so even if it's inaccurate, the creators kept within what's been established already, even if it's untrue. Either way, the dreaded Chicxulub impactor moves into view as quote-unquote the dinosaur's nemesis. This particular rendition of the KPG extinction event is really cool and iconic, even if the one shown in Prehistoric Park still looks better in my opinion. The sound design is amazing, and really helps sell the size and power of this thing as it smashes into the Gulf of Mexico, causing debris and shockwaves. As a kid when I watched this, I always imagined these smaller rocks to be the dinosaurs being thrown out into space. Yeah. This meteor sequence becomes the intro to every episode going forward, before the titles, which serves as a reminder that this show takes place after the dinosaurs, and none of it would be possible without this cataclysmic collision with the planet. Back on the ground again, there's footage of the shockwaves blowing trees and other debris towards the camera, as we get the ultimate opening line.
This series is about what happened next.
We transition into a much calmer forest environment, millions of years after the events of what we've just seen, and see a habitat seen later in this episode, with the Leptictidium hopping by and the Propaleotherium grazing in a forest glade. All of this is footage we see again later on, the first of many examples of reused footage within the show.
Just think what you and Miss Breckenridge could do with a dozen Eohippi.
Narration tells us that everything over 10 kilograms has been wiped out by the extinction, so the species left behind was small. These bizarre creatures are not named here, saving that for a proper introduction later, but are classified as mammals by the narration, which over the course of evolution
Left behind these small beginnings and took over the world.
The next few shots show more scenes from future episodes that give you a taste of what's to come, with many of the other species shown, including ones to catch the viewer's eye. These are the Macrauchenia, Megatherium, Entelodon, Woolly Mammoth, Basilosaurus, Moratherium, Didicurus, Brontothere, Indragothere, and Smilodon. Honourable mention goes to the shark species Physogalius, before we see two more mammals, the Australopithecus and Cro-Magnon. This intro then alludes to the evolution of mankind, as we are shown the Australopithecus taking their bipedal stance.
As a professor of science, I assure you that we did in fact evolve from filthy monkey men.
This unfortunately makes it less of a reveal in the fourth episode Next of Kin, but it is also important to help tell the story of human evolution, so it's a welcome addition to the sequence. The chanting, fast-paced music plays throughout this sequence as we finish on shots of the Ice Age, with the mammoths and humans alongside, before it dissolves into the titles. Before any of the episodes themselves, each one begins with dynamic titles which are the same but different from the ones from Dinosaurs. Instead of showing semi-translucent animal renders of the creatures, they show full-on rendered animals complete with textures and opaqueness, moving through very quick shots and chaotic blurry backgrounds, with 3D rock textures on them which creates a sense of movement, and of the animals being from the rocks themselves as fossils. All of this is accompanied by the excellent music from composer Ben Bartlett, who returns to score the show after doing the others. Unlike the more slow, orchestral and grand melodies of Walking with Dinosaurs, which reflect the majesty and size of the creatures, the music for Walking with Beasts is much more upbeat, often with faster tempos, and with added human vocals chanting in a tribal manner for the titles, and also appearing in 2 out of the 6 episodes. The style of this music, even though it's very different, still fits with what's come before, and is easily one of the best soundtracks ever composed for a TV show. The first titles we see are of the music only, but every subsequent titles have additional sound effects from some of the creatures featured in them. The new species not seen already in the intro sequence to episode 1 are the Gastornis, Chalcothere, Andrewsarchus, Hyenodon, Neanderthal, Woolly Rhinoceros, Dorodon, and Megaloceros. After the manic whirlwind of the titles, they then end with the amazing logo of the series in full view, with the Heat Smilodon replacing the Heat Dinosaur, and a fully realised Smilodon behind the logo clawing and leaving scratch marks from the background, as it transitions into the episode. Iconic. After the titles, we are straight into episode 1, New Dawn. I mean the real New Dawn. Perfection. This episode takes place in the Paleogene period, specifically the Eocene epoch, around 49 million years ago in Germany. This has always been one of my favourite eras in Earth's history, and my favourite episode of Walking with Beasts and Walking with in its entirety. I can't get enough of it. I love the weirdness and almost alien-like animals that lived at this time, a time when evolution was really throwing mammals in any direction to see what would stick. Because of the extinction of the dinosaurs, this left a massive gap in ecological niches that mammals could exploit. This first episode, unlike the others, takes place over only 24 hours, but manages to squeeze in a lot of content despite this. The name New Dawn mirrors the first episode of Walking with Dinosaurs, New Blood, but can also mean the dawn of a new day, seeing how this episode is only a day long, and the dawn of a new era, with the Cenozoic succeeding the Mesozoic before it. It's also set in a beautiful location within the lush rainforests of Java, which helps the atmosphere enormously and appears very ancient and distinct. The creatures in this episode primarily come from the discoveries at the fossil site of the MESSEL pits in Germany, which has had absolutely stunning fossils come out of it, including creatures so exquisitely preserved that you can still see the fur line around the skeletons, and even the stomach contents within. These discoveries give us so much insight into this region of Earth at the dawn of mammals. I'd highly recommend watching the documentary The Link, which goes into detail about the MESSEL pits and the discovery of Ida. All of the sound effects in this show are fantastic and unique, and each episode has its own ambience in the background, which helps differentiate the regions and time periods. This particular sound effect plays a lot through this episode, and a couple of the others, and I've always wanted to know what it's from. Sounds like some sort of corvid, but I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments if you know what it is. I would have loved to have seen this time period myself if I had Nigel Marven's time portal sticks. That and the Carboniferous, of course.
Carboniferous? Here we come!
The narration states that the Earth has become far hotter, and is now covered by dense tropical and humid forests, which grow in an unbroken chain around the planet. What a beautiful and pristine time to see the Earth. All of this heat can be attributed to the PALEOCENE-EOCENE thermal maximum, where global temperatures rose by more than 5 degrees Celsius, which led to an increase in carbon dioxide levels as well. This lasted roughly 100,000 years, until the global temperatures declined once more. We then get a meteor's perspective as it crashes down into the Eocene's forest, fortunately not causing any mass extinctions this time, but instead causing a pretty peeved Propaleotherium, probably. Coming out of the darkness of the early morning forest to investigate the embers of the fallen meteor is the star of the episode, the Leptictidium. An amazing attention to detail is the way the leaf litter interacts seamlessly with the CGI model. I applaud Walking With for consistently creating unique colour patterning for their subjects. Nothing is reused from modern animals, and everything is new and distinct. This is part of the reason why these designs are still so popular and recognisable today, over 20 years after the release of some of these programs. Whilst we don't get a proper look at the Leptictidium in the daylight in this scene, you can really appreciate its design in the later sequences under full sun, with the striking cream-striped back and spots, with hazel-brown fur, and even convincing-looking whiskers on the puppet. It looks amazing, and not too dissimilar to a PACA in patterning. Leptictidium lived from 50 to 35 million years ago, so it's actually within the right time period of this episode, which is impressive considering the track record of Walking With lumping species together in eras and time periods which didn't coexist, something that Beast also does quite a lot. It's also given an appropriate insectivorous diet, which most Leptictidium species had, and the way it moves is also based off of that of a SENGI, with the quick hopping, which could also be attributed to something like a WALLABY, BILBY, or BANDICOOT. The Leptictidium's nose is another adaptation to help it hunt, as well as the large ears for detecting prey. We also see it clearing pathways of leaf litter for the trails leading back to its nest. All of these are yet more traits that are similar to Sengis, which display the same behaviour in Africa. This species and its design has always had a special place in my heart, and like many paleo fans, I'm sure this was the first introduction to this thing. More narration tells us that mammals are extremely well adapted to almost any environment, and take up the niches the dinosaurs left behind, and we see Leptictidium vision as another one appears to the first and greets it in a charming manner. This is also the first example of many practical effects used for the species in this series. Just like Walking With Dinosaurs, this show utilises them a lot, especially for close-ups. Fittingly, they all look outstanding and so lifelike. Stellar work. However, the cause of something much larger causes the Leptictidium to hop and hide in the undergrowth, as we get our first look at the main predator of the forest. More on that in a bit. This is the giant terror bird wannabe, Gastornis. Even in the dim light you can see its gorgeous colour patterning, which makes it one of the best designs in the show. This is also an example of footage that will be reused again later on in the episode, yet it's still done in a way which makes it not very noticeable. The Gastornis stalks through the gloomy forest, searching for its first meal of the day. vocalizing with its strange shrill and gurgling calls, and we get a Leptictidium's eye view as it peers up at the bird, which moves away, seemingly fooling it into thinking it's not spotted the little guy. We glimpse the practical Gastornis head pupper here as it moves off screen, only to come back to surprise and attack the Leptictidium. I love this scene, with the Gastornis thundering behind the hopping prey. It's so well done. You can really sense the danger, but luckily the little Leptictidium flees into the base of a fig tree, where the gigantic beak of the predatory bird can't reach. Narration lets us know that despite the dinosaurs dying out, the birds carry on their legacy, a very quick way to tell the audience that birds are directly descended from dinosaurs, which mirrors what is said at the end of Death of the Dynasty. Accompanied by another amazing practical effect in the form of the Gastornis head in its full glory, we then get another very cool line with,
For the first and only time in its history, birds rule the earth.
The Gastornis' calls echo through the forest as if to say that it owns it, as the sun begins to rise, with the appropriately named track New Dawn playing, with the same text reading on screen. This music is like a march, with the constant methodical drum beat driving on the ascent of the sun, the brass notes carrying the tune, and the strange sounding instrumentation which help with the mystery of the setting of this place. There are some truly beautiful shots of the early morning rays of the sun casting through the gaps in the trees, with the faint orange light. In fact, this whole episode seems to have an orange filter on it for daylight, and a blue for dusk and night, which links it to fantasy movies which often have the same colour palette and give off the same otherworldly feel. Fading back into Under the Canopy, with the same fig tree scene earlier, we get a proper introduction to the Leptictidium, which looks gorgeous in the sunlight, especially with a head puppet, and it squeaks its delight in having survived the Gastornis attack. But like every rock and roll artist, the narration says that
She must live fast and will probably die young.
3 of her offspring come out of the nest to investigate the outside world. These are all just shrunken models of the adult, but suit their purpose. The father of this family is strangely absent, but males would typically not help rear their young in mammal species like this. Mother Leptictidium instructs her young to stay inside and to keep away from the many predators that lurk in the forest, which they can afford to do since they're still relying on milk. The mother, however, still needs food in order to keep herself alive, and also to produce the milk for the offspring, so hops away in search of prey.
Hey, that rhymes.
The next music track is much more percussion-based, with hints of a melody, but fits perfectly with the quirky way the Leptictidium goes to hunt. Sadly, this, like many tracks, went unreleased in the official released album, including the first 2 in the intro. This shot of the Leptictidium amongst the orange glow of dawn and the silhouetted saplings is so beautiful. We also get told that she hunts in the early morning like this in order to catch the prey of reptiles, amphibians and invertebrates off guard, as they are still warming up, so can't move as quickly as the warm-blooded mammal. I sure hope that frog was alright after being snatched off the tree by the CGI Leptictidium. According to the wiki, this was a live-acted animal here, but I'm wondering whether it was actually a practical model. It's never confirmed either way, but it's certainly possible seeing how it just lets itself be taken. There are quite a few live-acted animals throughout this series, which beasts can get away with more because of the familiarity of them being around in the Cenozoic. It also helps ground the prehistoric animals more by showing that they lived alongside more recognisable species. The Gastornis' calls constantly loom in the background, but far enough away that they're not a threat. This is a really cool inclusion to the overall ambience of this episode, as you hear it a lot. We then get some awesome slow-motion shots of the Leptictidium attempting to catch small flying insects, which are live-acted by damselflies in close-ups, but appear to be either composited in or fully CGI in the wide shots when the Leptictidium jumps up to reach them. More exposition is given to the environment of this area via narration of new shots of the forest, with the eerie calls of some godonosha coming from within. Another music track plays with the piano forming the repetitive melody, as well as some strings and guitar. This track gets reused a couple of times during this episode, and forms one of the main themes in it. The presence of the geothermal springs and mud pools giving off toxic gas and creating earthquakes foreshadows the finale of this episode, with close-ups of said mud pools bubbling away.
Ah, what is it?
The bog of eternal stench!
That background almost looks like the helipad spot from Isla Nublar in Jurassic Park. The Leptictidium seemingly peers down at these mud pools in disgust, and we see a shot of the sleeping godonosha in a tree, a species which I'll talk about more later, and then a shot of a Eurotomandua with young on its back as it climbs through the branches. This species is live acted by a northern Tomandua, which is already such a cool animal. Eurotomandua lived from 47.8 to 46.3 million years ago, and if this episode is set 49 million years ago, then it's only a few million years out from when it actually existed. All of the family of anteaters, sloths and armadillos, Xenarthra, are found only in the Americas, so the presence of a tamandua-like animal would at first seem quite unusual to be found in Germany. Yet most scientists now agree that Eurotamandua is more akin to being a type of pangolin, which are found in the Old World, so it would make more sense. This would mean that its depiction of it looking like an anteater would be inaccurate, as it likely possessed scales, but it's a really cool inclusion to show either way, and only adds to the diversity of life in this episode. After showing the Leptictidium again, we are straight into
the forest's more menacing side. The birds.
Okay, is it just me, or do the sounds from the Gastornis sound oddly comical? Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love how it sounds, because it sounds so weird, but at the same time it does sound a bit like a human doing some strange impression. The Gastornis strides into view, an amazing design for an equally amazing creature. The almost metallic minty green of the back feathers and wings, coupled with the red skin around the face, as well as the beige underside, beak and feet, and black head feathers, create a truly iconic looking appearance. Though considering that it's supposed to be an ambush predator, I'm not sure how well those garish colours help it blend in. So let's get the big issue out of the way first. Gastornis is now thought to have been herbivorous and not carnivorous due to extensive analysis of its beak and the calcium isotopes which show little to no evidence of meat in its diet. It also doesn't display any raptorial traits that you'd expect in such an animal, such as a hooked beak. Despite its extremely large beak, it was thought to have been used for crunching through nuts and seeds rather than flesh and bone, so sadly the whole sequence of it hunting, killing and eating the PALEOCENE later on in the episode is entirely wrong for this animal. Some mammals had already grown to a fair size and become predatory anyway, which is sadly lacking in this episode, unless you count the PALEOCENE. So even if the giant birds weren't carnivorous, there was still danger for smaller animals to contend with. Other than that, the depiction of Gastornis is pretty accurate, except for the raptorial beak added to the model. Also, the feathers are rendered so well on the CGI model, which is amazing for something that came out in 2001.
A half-ton pile of muscle and feathers, as tall as a grown man.
It's appropriately sized, being 2 meters tall, so just over the height of a man, and the weight is a decent estimate too. When this species was first discovered, it was named Diatryma, but that name has since become synonymous with Gastornis. It lived from 55 to 40 million years ago, and was also a relative of modern ducks, geese, and other waterfowl.
Ducks, geese, puns.
And from this, it gained the nickname the terror duck, because of the previously held belief that it was predatory. Even outside of the inaccurate carnivorous depiction in Walking with Beasts, it still would have been a formidable adversary and not something to mess with. This particular individual is a female and is protecting her egg, safely in a nest built between some buttress roots. The egg moving is also a practical effect and looks flawless. Very dinosaur-esque looking in fact. Looks nice and secure where no predator can reach. Yeah, about that. A second Gastornis arrives, seemingly accidentally blundering into the female's territory, probably looking for food. And this is the only time that we see more than one Gastornis on screen at the same time. The narration also states that the birds have grown big, to fill the role of the dinosaurs. The two giants clash, the small mammal escapes. There are echoes here of a bygone age. You know you've watched this show way too many times when you can quote the entirety of it. Narration, sound effects, music cues and everything else in between.
Life well spent!
The pair of birds square up, each giving violent snaps at one another, as the Leptictidium hops away unseen. More excellent sound design with the Gastornis screaming at each other. Their method of fighting seems to just be this, so as not to cause injury. The female guarding her egg stands her ground as the intruder clashes its beak against hers and then retreats, as the female screams her dominance in triumph. Better go back to your egg before anything happens to it. The Leptictidium, meanwhile, still looking for more food because of her warm-blooded metabolism, reaches the lakeside where she encounters the next obstacle in her path.
There is a newcomer down by the lake. Stirring in the morning's early rays is an Ambulocetus, a bizarre beast that has swum up the river from the nearby coast.
So Ambulocetus is not actually known from Germany. Its fossils found only in Pakistan. But due to the narration you just heard, this implies that it has travelled a large distance to get here, likely in search of prey. And seeing how this species is a capable swimmer, this theoretically could be possible. Also, the fact that we only ever see one individual further suggests this.
Ambulocetus in fact means walking whale.
Ambulocetus is an early whale, which, through the course of the evolution of this lineage, gave rise to the gigantic marine cetaceans that still exist today, including the largest animal ever thought to have lived, the blue whale. The narration mentions that it walks awkwardly on land, as it's adapted more for swimming, more so than the PACA for example, which had a more wolf-like appearance and was more primitive as far as whale evolution is concerned. Also, Ambulocetus is correctly given a length of 3 meters. The way it swims like an otter or a dolphin in the up and down motion still holds up to this day, and helps push the idea that this animal is different from all the other species it shares the water with, such as crocodiles or fish. But unlike modern whales or dolphins, Ambulocetus lacks any tail flukes, which would evolve in later species. Ambulocetus also lived from 48 to 47 million years ago, so is just a tiny bit off from this episode's setting, but otherwise perfect. Once again, Crawly Creatures really pushes the boat out with their amazing practical effects. The Ambulocetus head puppet looks amazing, and the mottled brown colouring on the body is perfect for an ambush predator lying in wait in murky water. It even has counter shading with a pale underside. Also, the mud clouds created when it first enters the water look so convincing. The narration also says that it has quote-unquote no ears, which doesn't mean that it didn't have any ears at all, rather that it lacked any external ears and instead used its lower jawbone to listen to vibrations in its environment, similar to how modern toothed whales do today. The music used for this animal is especially eerie and ethereal, which plays hauntingly through the water as it swims with occasional percussion. It's a fantastic track, and one I wished was released officially. Swimming in front of the Ambulocetus before darting away in fear is the Eocene crocodilian Kentisouchus, live acted by a Siamese crocodile. From its brief appearance it seems to look pretty accurate, however Kentisouchus is thought to have belonged to the group Tomistominae, which includes the modern species of the false gharial, so it wasn't a member of the Crocodilinae like the Siamese crocodile that represents it. The fossils of Kentisouchus have also not been found in Germany, instead only in England, France and possibly Ukraine. However, in the episode it does at least appear within the correct time frame, the real animal living from 55.8 to 48.6 million years ago, so overall not a bad addition. Despite the Ambulocetus being the top predator of the lake, it is far from safe as the lake itself holds massive quantities of volcanic gas, which, if released, could cause devastation and suffocation for many of the animals in the forest. We then see an example of this from a bubble erupting on the surface, with the narration stating,
The lake is a time bomb.
Meanwhile, the Ambulocetus reaches the shallows and stands just below the lake's surface, waiting in ambush for prey to wander by the shoreline. This particular shot makes it look like it doesn't have a tail, which is quite uncanny really. It's also reused later. Above the water and oblivious to the danger beneath it, a PALEOCENE wanders by, hoping for a quick sip, as we see a fantastic practical effect of the early horse before it decides to drink. The Ambulocetus crouches down in the water, ready to pounce, before erupting out and only narrowly missing its quarry. All done in slow motion for added drama. Seamless integration of CGI in the real-world environment. The PALEOCENE also runs away in slow motion, with the reverberating cymbals. And wow, the way the shadows move over the top of the CGI model is amazing. Outstanding work. According to Jeremy Gibson Harris, who handled the animatronics at Crawly Creatures, on the last take of this scene, the Ambulocetus' head hit a rock and smashed its jaw up beyond repair. This music is also taken directly from the Walking with Dinosaurs episode Spirits of the Ice Forest, with the Koolasuchus attacking the Lianosaura under similar circumstances. I don't consider it copying since it's the same composer of the music, and it makes sense thematically to do what it's done before. These odd plucking of the strings also help create a lot of tension as the Ambulocetus prepares to strike. This track is used again for another scene later. Having failed to catch the little horse, the Ambulocetus swims away, going hungry for now.
But the day is long, and he will try again and again.
Elsewhere in the forest, the mother Leptictidium returns to her nest, where her eager youngsters are waiting. Her hunt wasn't particularly successful, and now that the predators are becoming more active, she decides to rest through the day's heat, and will hunt again later when it's cooler. As midday approaches, the temperatures soar above 30 degrees, and nothing stirs except the newborn Gastonis chick beginning to hatch.
It's the last mistake you'll ever make.
Narration then alludes to yet another predator roaming the forest, but not what you might expect. As we pan down onto a tree branch, through the dappled light of the canopy, we see for ourselves, that doesn't look very dangerous. Oh.
Giant, carnivorous ants.
I love this reveal. It's just so menacing, especially with the dark drumbeat leading up to it. Those ants look so angry and ready for a fight. This is not going to end well. The line,
They are on the lookout for prey. Any creature that can't get away in time.
just gives me chills. Some shots also cut back to the Leptictidium sleeping a few times to make the audience think that they could also be at risk from these nasty insects. The chick continues to scream ear-splittingly for help, but with the mother away hunting, it's defenseless. It uses a cool practical effect, but that won't save it. All the while the tense music is still building. So the ants themselves, though never stated, are actually representing the species Titanomyrma, which, like the other fossils found at MESSEL, have been perfectly preserved. They lived from 48.6 to 46.2 million years ago, so just like the Ambulocetus, just a tiny bit off for this episode. They are the largest species of ant to ever have been discovered, correctly stated in this episode, if it's meant to be the T. gigantea, with males growing 3 cm long and queens up to 7 cm. The fossils also indicate that they possessed no sting, so would instead utilise their mandibles to deal the damage, by either foraging for vegetation or being carnivorous like seen in the episode. They behave like modern-day driver ants from Africa and Asia, by patrolling the forest and looking for victims, which is a terrifying concept. They may have also used formic acid to spray as a defence. One thing that seems to be missing from this depiction, however, is any form of wings, which the fossils clearly show, as well as an enlarged abdomen. Otherwise they're pretty accurate. As the ants descend on the helpless chick, some even crawl across the camera lens. There are also a lot of live-acted insects visible as well, which only adds to the realism, but also suggesting that the chick puppet likely had some actual meat covering it to entice them to feed. It's also almost impossible to differentiate the real ants from the CGI ones in this gruesome scene, as they swarm over the chick, eating it alive, in possibly one of the darkest and goriest moments in any of Walking With. Yikes. All of this is done with little to no narration, so viewers can just take in the horror unfolding before their eyes. The camera then cuts back to a wide shot of the nest, where the chick's fate is unknown, but we as the viewer can probably deduce what happened to it. This is incredibly impactful, and doubtless left an impression in all our minds when we first watched this. Regardless, it's as dark as it is fascinating to me. As we leave the ant buffet, we then get a shot of the huge gas bubble erupting from the lake, which foreshadows the evening's events, which I can only assume was done with a bubble machine in order to create that effect. After that we see a cameo shot of a paleopython, live acted by a smooth green snake. This snake, only seen in this one shot slithering away, appears to be the right size for a paleopython, which could grow to around 2 meters in length, and the green coloration from the smooth green snake makes sense in a forested environment with all the foliage around it to camouflage in. This species was likely arboreal and spent a lot of time in trees like modern day boa constrictors, but would also occasionally come down to the ground as seen here. It has also been found in MESSEL dating back to 48 to 34 million years ago, so just out from the episode again, but it's good enough. In the mid-afternoon, the early horse species PALEOCENE-EOCENE forages in groups for food on the forest floor. Quite a tranquil scene, but danger is never far away. PALEOCENE is now known as Eurohippus, but still resembles what we see in the episode, so there's little to no accuracy problems as far as I can tell, which is great. They're correctly given the size of just larger than domestic cats, and lacking any proper hooves, having instead
4 hoof-like toes.
And their coloration is especially striking, with their orangey-brown back, white stripe running from the face to the hind legs, darker stripes on the lower legs, and the eye spots reminiscent of the leptictinium on the back as well. All of this makes an iconic design, and would also be practical in blending in between the tangle of tree branches and plants in the dense forests. They also lived approximately 56 to 48.6 million years ago, so are within the right time period for the episode. Yay! It's amazing to see how horses started out so early on in the history of Cenozoic mammals. The music playing here is quite slow and uses what sounds like a glockenspiel to reflect the diminutive size of these early horses, but with hints of peril with the brass notes. The female Gastornis, unaware of her chick's untimely death, stalks the PALEOCENE herd, who are already on high alert, and quickly flee when some helicopter seeds cascade down towards them, prompting an unsuccessful hunt for the bird, which cries out in frustration. As we move on to late afternoon, the leptictinium family emerge from the safety of their fig tree to start to hunt again, and the female clears her escape routes. She also brings her offspring along this time to give them their first hunt and to tell them what is or isn't safe to eat. As a cricket unwittingly wanders by the mother, she snaps it up into her mouth and lets the youngsters smell it to understand that it's a safe food item. Also when in her mouth, the cricket becomes an ant for some reason. The young leptictinium begin to forage for themselves, and one attempts to catch a live-acted gecko, unsuccessfully. I'm not entirely sure which species of gecko this is. The Ambulocetus makes his way onto the riverbank and lies in wait for any passing prey. This thing just looks like a crocodile when it does this, and sometimes you forget that you're looking at a mammal rather than a reptile. More music starts to play, with piano, flute, and later on brass and strings, telling the hunt that is about to unfold. With many prey animals out foraging, including the leptictinium and the PALEOCENE herd, the Gastornis prepares for another hunt. The odds are in her favour this time, as the PALEOCENE have been foraging on fermenting grapes, which dull their senses from the small amount of alcohol inside them, and barely even flinch when the whole bromeliad falls right next to one of them, as a god in ocean knocks one down from the treetops. I never thought I'd ever find myself looking at clips of drunk mini horses, but it's fantastically comical if it weren't for the oncoming threat.
This is a bad time to get careless.
As both the Ambulocetus and Gastornis move into position, we get a great shot of the Gastornis slowly walking towards the camera before stopping and selecting her target as the music fades out before coming back in full force as the chase begins. This amazing panorama shot of the Gastornis pursuing the PALEOCENE appears to be a reference to the movie The Matrix, with a similar shot happening in that, but this is way cooler, especially with the helicopter seeds whistling down in slow motion. Possibly my favourite scene of the episode actually. When the Gastornis reaches the mini-horse, it takes hold of it and begins to shake it violently, with all its strength and ferocity, as the Leptictidiums scurry to safety. Just. That poor Ambulocetus isn't getting much luck here. The Gastornis continues to shake its prey, with the music blaring, and the Godonosha above, disturbed by the commotion, watch on in horror until the bird determines that the little horse is dead, and drops it to the ground with a cock of the head. I love that little detail. Satisfied that the animal is lifeless, the Gastornis tucks in to feed, making excited gurgling sounds as we get yet another iconic and awesome line that has stuck with me ever since I first heard it, even if it's not accurate anymore.
This is a world where birds eat horses.
The blood on the beak of the practical effect only adds to the chill factor. The sun begins to set, which looks just like the opening of Walking with Dinosaurs, as the Godonosha calls echo through the forest once again. At dusk, the Gastornis returns to her nest, having had a successful hunt, but only now to discover the fate of her chick.
The biggest predator here, humbled by the smallest.
Ironic.
That poor baby got stripped right down to the bone, with only a trace of blood coating the empty skeleton as the last ant makes its way off to the others. Damn, that's pretty dark, but an excellent practical effect regardless. You really do feel sorry for the Gastornis, who even sounds upset as she's invested so much time and energy into nurturing this egg, only for it to become ant food. As she walks off into the forest, this is the last time we see the Gastornis, but boy did it leave an impression. In lighter news, the Leptictidiums survived and make their way back to their nest to sleep for the night.
The night is usually a safe time for them. Tonight will be different.
How spookier could you get in this carnival of carnage of an episode? With music from earlier playing, we get a brilliant time-lapse of the day fading to night, which seeps into the forest. All of these scenes at night are filmed in black and white. Another awesome shot is the Godonosha jumping between the trees, silhouetted by the moon. Beautiful stuff with the flutes in the score elevating this as well. I do love how with every successive scene we get introduced to more and more species in this weird forest. A Godonosha wakes up from a day of slumber and makes a pig squealing noise of all things, before beginning its night of nocturnal activities. Unfortunately, this model looks way too much like a simian, like a monkey, and should resemble a prosimian, like a lemur or bushbaby, due to how early on in the evolution of primates this is. All primates were nocturnal at this point in history, relying on their vision to get around at night, much like today's tarsiers. Narration does say that they are highly intelligent and resourceful by showing us scenes of them breaking into insect nests in the bark of trees, similar to the Rhamphorhynchus trying to do the same in Cruel Sea. The half and half colouring on the fur with the silvery grey on the front and dark grey on the back is a plausible colour scheme as well, and they are appropriately sized, being just smaller than the PALEOCENE. They were likely solitary, much like lorises or aye-ayes, but the narration explains the social future of the majority of primate species, including ourselves. Godonosha was also found 49 million years ago. The Ambulocetus lurks in the shallows, watching the Godonosha and waiting for something to wander too close to the water's edge, having still not eaten anything today. This introduces us to the Lesmesodon, which goes unnamed, but we can call it the not bear dog, as it shares the exact same model and possibly texture of the bear dog, or Cynodictis from episode 3, Land of Giants. Lesmesodon lived from 50.8 to 46.3 million years ago, and was likely nocturnal, but also was probably smaller than what we see in the episode, being only weasel-sized, with shorter legs, ears, and a longer tail. Overall, it was a capable predator in its own right, but sadly it becomes hapless prey for the Ambulocetus, who finally get some dinner after the Lesmesodon
chooses the wrong bit of lake to drink from.
You can almost see it nod here, as if it thinks it's found the right bit of lake to drink from. Oh, the irony. After surprising the little carnivore, the Ambulocetus lunges and secures it within its jaws, dragging it into the depths of the lake, whimpering away. In what can only be described as a tease of freedom, the Ambulocetus lets it go for a split second where it almost gets up to the surface to take a breath before the early whale grabs hold of it again and pulls it down further to drown it.
Isn't nature wonderful?
As the stroke of midnight arrives with a shot of the full moon along with some chilling piano music, the Ambulocetus emerges from the water and sleeps for the night, having presumably eaten the Lesmezodon. Meanwhile, the Godonosha get frisky with one another, which Kenneth describes as
the normal rhythm of the night.
But this is not a normal night. The clouds shadow the moon to help accentuate this point. Excellent directing. The oncoming earth tremor begins with dangerous music playing, causing one Godonosha to start violently shaking a sapling in distress, making chimp noises now, as all the other plants start to shake too. This larger than normal earthquake causes all the animals in the forest to become alarmed, and also has the dire consequence of releasing the toxic gas from the lake. This creates a cloud of carbon dioxide that spreads through the forest, suffocating anything in its path. This is shown via some panning shots through the forest, with a slight blur effect applied to them, symbolizing the chaos. The stressful music blasts through as one poor Propaleotherium succumbs to the gas cloud as it lies down and dies. If I had a nickel for every time a Propaleotherium died in this episode, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. The dawn of the next day with the slower, mournful piano reveals the trail of corpses, including the dead Propaleotherium, now a practical effect. All eyes are now on the fig tree, where luckily the Leptictinium family survived and seem to be doing fine. The narration says that she and her litter are away from the toxic cloud of gas. However, this is just another day for the female Leptictinium, and
Her struggle to survive never stops. It's time to hunt again.
the Ambulocetus lies motionless before the Leptictinium, suffocated by the gas cloud from the night before. That thing didn't have much luck, did it? Again, it's great to see how much detail was put into the practical effect. Ironically, the Leptictinium and its kind are destined to become extinct when the world begins to get cooler and drier, causing the forest to shrink. Kenneth's narration puts it best.
Ambulocetus is the one with the big future. He is the ancestor of the whales, the most magnificent dynasty of mammals, and mammals are about to take over the world.
Couldn't have put it better myself. This links directly into the next episode and the future of mammals as a whole, where we see more whale species present, more adapted to life in the oceans, and larger terrestrial mammals as well. Just before the credits, a single ant crawls over the body of the dead Ambulocetus, foreshadowing what will become of it, since we as the audience know what these little bugs are capable of. Such a neat way to end the episode, along with the awesome transitional fade to white around the creature's body. Perfect. Each credit sequence shows clips from the next episode, with the amazing title music playing over the top, and narration talking through what it's going to be about, leaving everyone, I imagine, wanting more. It doesn't get any better than this. Thus ends New Dawn, a fantastic addition to Walking With and paleo media in general. Thank you very much for listening, and look out for my review of episode 2, Whale Killer, very soon.